She walked into the wrong door at the wrong federal terminal, and 5 government K9s lost their minds. Not barking the way dogs barked when they encountered a stranger. Not the controlled warning sound of trained animals doing their job. This was something else entirely, lunging, spinning, 2 of them hitting their kennel panels hard enough to rattle the steel frame bolts, a third wrapping his leash so fast around his handler's forearm that the man went down on one knee on the concrete floor. Armed CBP officers streamed in from both ends of the staging area, radios spiking, hands moving toward holsters. And in the middle of all of it stood a 32-year-old trauma nurse in burgundy scrubs. A hospital badge clipped to her lanyard, a backpack over one shoulder, reading those dogs the way a surgeon read a scan before she'd even put her gloves on. Captain Miles Borick covered the distance to her in about 8 seconds. "You're in a restricted federal area," he said. "ID now." Willa Pendry looked at him. Not at his rank insignia, not at the weapon at his hip. At him. The way she looked at people who walked into the trauma bay at 2 in the morning, believing that volume was the same thing as authority. "They're not reacting to a threat," she said quietly. "They're reacting to a memory." Nobody in that corridor believed her. They should have. The morning had not been Willa Pendry's finest. She'd driven 40 minutes from her extended stay motel to Kellander Federal Cargo Terminal for what her agency coordinator had described as a routine credentialing check. New contract, port medical unit, standard paperwork that would take 20 minutes at most. What the coordinator had failed to mention was that the medical intake office had been temporarily relocated from Building C to an annex on the south side of the terminal, and that the signs indicating this relocation were printed in 10-point font on sheets of copy paper, taped to doors that looked identical to every other door in a facility that had been designed by someone who believed in institutional uniformity above all else. She'd been awake since 4:30. She'd eaten half a granola bar in the parking lot because the motel's breakfast window had already closed. She had 22 minutes before her appointment window closed, and she had turned left instead of right at the junction past the cargo way station, which put her in front of a door that looked in every visible way like a maintenance access entrance. She pushed through it. The smell hit her before the sound did. 5 Belgian Malinois, gun oil, and the particular chemical and adrenaline scent of a K9 staging environment running at full operational readiness. Her body went still before her brain caught up. Some trained layer of her, one she'd spent 4 years methodically covering over with double shifts and discharge paperwork, and the deliberate ordinary machinery of a civilian ER, recognized it instantly. She'd been in rooms that smelled like this before, just never one she'd been allowed to talk about afterward. The corridor was maybe 50 feet long, wide enough for equipment carts, 5 kennels along the right wall, each occupied. She counted them automatically, registered their postures, the set of their ears. CBP K9 unit. She could tell from the harness markings, the clipped efficiency of the staging. Handlers in tactical green posted at each kennel. 2 supervisors at the far end with the rigid posture of people who took their authority seriously. She started to back out. That was when the dog in Kennel 3 saw her. He went rigid, not the stiffening of an animal encountering an unfamiliar person. The other kind, recognition rigid, like something inside him had just oriented toward a point on a compass he hadn't been able to find in a long time. He made a sound that wasn't quite a bark, low and urgent, not aggression, but something closer to relief and confusion folded together. Within 4 seconds, the other 4 dogs had caught it and amplified it into something that looked and sounded, from the outside, exactly like a serious federal security incident. 2 kennel panels shook. One handler lurched forward as his dog hit the leash hard enough to yank him sideways. The female in Kennel 5 went in the opposite direction and cowered, which was its own category of problem. Commands flew in English and the abbreviated language of CBP K9 units. None of them landed. These were trained federal animals performing at the highest level of operational deployment, and right now they were behaving like they'd collectively forgotten every hour of conditioning they'd ever had. Willa stood frozen in the doorway. She knew what this was. She knew it in a way she couldn't explain to anyone in this corridor without explaining things she didn't have clearance to explain. And that understanding didn't help her situation at all, because from the outside, she was a civilian nurse who had walked through a restricted federal door and triggered a behavioral emergency in a government K9 unit. She turned to go. Stop. Not a request. Willa stopped. Captain Miles Boric walked toward her through the chaos without breaking stride, which told her he was either very experienced or very good at performing calm. He had the movement of a man accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around him, people stepping aside, conversations pausing, authority taken for granted in every room he'd ever entered. Late 30s, captain's bars, the kind of jaw that photographed well at promotion ceremonies. Identification, he said. She reached into her backpack. I took a wrong turn. The medical intake office. Identification, now. She handed him her hospital travel badge and her driver's license. He looked at both, then looked up. Willa Pendry, trauma nurse. He said it the way someone said a word they found mildly inconvenient. What are you doing in a restricted federal K9 staging area? Wrong door. I was looking for the medical annex. The medical annex, he repeated, is in a building on the south side of this terminal. The building you just walked out of is on the north side. You passed 4 restricted access markers getting here. I didn't see them. That's not a defense. He handed her IDs back with the efficiency of someone who'd already made a decision and was completing the formality. You'll be escorted out and your badge flagged with port security. Your contracting agency will be notified. Willa didn't argue. She'd dealt with authority figures who led with punishment before. It was almost always about something happening in their own chest that had nothing to do with her. She picked up her backpack, prepared to follow the officer Boric had gestured toward. Captain. A woman's voice from somewhere between kennels 2 and 3, quiet but carrying a specific weight that made Boric pause. Staff Sergeant Priya Anand was maybe 40, compact, with the particular stillness that came from years of learning that stillness was its own form of power. She was looking at Willa the way you looked at someone when you were trying to place a face in a context it didn't seem to belong in, not with suspicion exactly, but with the focused attention of someone whose read on people was usually right and was currently running into something it couldn't immediately categorize. Hold on, Anand said. Boric turned, Sergeant. Sir, she didn't say it loudly, just with enough weight to stop the momentum. Anand walked toward Willa, stopped about 5 feet away, and studied her with an expression that was difficult to read. Eyes to hands, posture, the way Willa was standing with the particular quality of someone who was not afraid. You started to say something, Anand said, when the captain asked about the dogs. I was going to leave. Before that, you started a sentence. The dogs were still unsettled, not at peak, but running elevated. Every time Willa shifted her weight, the dog in Kennel 3 cycled back up. His eyes hadn't left her since she'd entered. Willa looked at Anand carefully. She made a judgment call about what kind of person she was looking at. Then she said, They're not reacting to a threat. They're responding to me. That's a different thing. How would you know that? Anand said. She's a travel nurse, Boric said from behind Anand's shoulder. She doesn't know federal K9 behavioral indicators. She walked through a restricted door and she's stalling to avoid the flag. I'm not stalling, Willa said. I'll leave whenever you want. Walk, Anand said to him, flat, the way you said a word to make it stop moving. She kept her eyes on Willa. What's your background? Willa adjusted the strap of her backpack. The dog in Kennel 3 made that sound again, the low, urgent one, not aggression. The other thing. Trauma nurse, she said, currently contracted to your port medical unit. Before that, Kellander Regional. 4 years. Before Kellander Regional, Anand said, quieter. Boric made a sound somewhere between a scoff and a dismissal. This is consuming time we don't have. Sergeant Anand, the sweep window. The kennel panel for dog 3 dropped its lower latch. Not completely, the top catch held, but the bottom swung out with a crack of metal that sent 2 handlers scrambling forward. The Malinois in 3 hit the gap immediately, nose pushing at the opening, ears forward, and flat in the specific way that wasn't threatening and wasn't snapping. Just completely, absolutely oriented toward Willa, every line of his body aimed at her like a compass needle finding north. One of the other handlers lurched sideways as his dog hit the leash hard. The female in Kennel 5 cowered again. The male in Kennel 1 resumed his rhythmic impact against the grating. Boric was shouting now. Commands to handlers, orders to security personnel, a furious demand that someone remove the civilian right now. Stop. Willa said it without planning to. Some autopilot kicked in, the same one that took over in trauma bays when too many people were talking and a patient was crashing, and the room needed one voice to anchor everything else. It wasn't volume, it was frequency. Everything in the corridor stalled. Boric turned. The expression on his face had moved past authority into something uglier. You don't give orders in a federal. Your dogs are going to injure themselves or their handlers in the next 3 minutes if nothing changes, Willa said. Clean read, no drama. The lower latch on Kennel 3 is compromised. If that dog gets through before someone addresses it, you have a loose K9 in an active federal staging area. She glanced along the kennels, and the stress load on kennels 1 and 4. Check those latches too before you do anything else. Silence, except the dogs. Boric stared at her. His jaw was doing something complicated. The youngest handler at Kennel 2, maybe 24, with the look of someone who'd been holding his breath since this started, exhaled slowly. He glanced at Anand. She's right about the latch, Sergeant. I watched it flex when Grit hit it the second time. Boric's face did something that would have been understanding if it hadn't been so busy defending itself. Anand was already moving toward the maintenance call. The latch took 6 minutes to fix. The extra security personnel who drifted in during the chaos were cleared out. The corridor settled into the particular waiting stillness that existed just before something shifted. Willa stood in the center of it, with her backpack against the wall and her hands loose at her sides. She looked at the dog in Kennel 3. He looked at her. She could feel Boric behind her, the calculation in his stillness, a man deciding between waiting and reasserting. She could feel Anand watching from 2 kennels down with her flat, careful eyes. She could feel the handlers at each kennel, each of them doing the professional work of not showing their uncertainty, which meant their dogs were reading the suppressed version of it and working harder to compensate. She took one slow breath. And then she spoke, not in English, not in the command language the handlers had been using, in a sequence that hadn't appeared in any standard CBP or Federal K9 training manual in the last 6 years, from a program that had been officially dissolved and whose specific command vocabulary had been removed from documentation while remaining exactly where training always actually lived, in the bodies of the people and the animals who'd learned it together under circumstances that neither party was permitted to describe. All 5 dogs dropped, not one at a time, not in a wave, simultaneously. Perfect Sphinx position, heads up, paws forward, eyes locked on Willa with the complete and focused attention of animals responding to a signal that bypassed everything layered on top of their conditioning and went straight to the base. The silence afterward was the loudest thing Willa had heard in 4 years. Behind her, she heard one of the handlers say very quietly, "What did she just?" Anand made no sound at all. Boric's voice, when it came, had shed several things that had been in it before. The authority performance, the particular sharpness of a man accustomed to winning every room he walked into. What came out was smaller than any of it. "Who are you?" he said. Willa looked at the 5 dogs lying in perfect order along the corridor wall. The dog in Kennel 3, Grit, she'd heard his handler call him, was watching her with the calm, steady certainty of an animal who had been looking for something it couldn't name and had just found it. She thought about the question. She thought about the motel room with the unpacked bag and the 3-month contract she'd signed last week, and the granola bar she'd eaten in the parking lot this morning like it was the worst thing that could happen to her day. "My name is Willa Pendry," she said. "I'm a trauma nurse contracted to your port medical unit." A pause. "And I still need to find the medical annex." She turned around. Anand was 4 feet away. The expression on her face was not the expression of a staff sergeant running a security assessment. It was the expression of someone who had been looking at a locked door for a long time and had just watched someone open it with a key they absolutely should not have had. "You're not going to tell me," Anand said. "The dogs will hold that position for about 5 minutes," Willa said. "That gives your handlers time to reset. When I leave, use the standard decompression sequence. Don't rush it." She looked at each handler down the line. "Get them water before you move them." She paused. "And check Grit's right front leg. He's been favoring it since I walked in." She picked up her backpack. She was 3 steps from the door when Borek said, behind her, stripped of everything that had been in his voice at the beginning, "Your service record doesn't exist in any database I have access to." Not a threat. An observation from a man who had started thinking instead of reacting. Willa pushed through the door. The terminal swallowed her. She walked fast, eyes forward, bag on her shoulder, moving the way she'd learned to move in environments where slowing down cost you things you couldn't get back. She was 60 feet from the building when her phone vibrated. Unknown number, Federal Exchange. The text was 5 words. "Grit has a stress fracture." Willa read it twice, looked at the exit, looked at the text. She turned around. Anand was outside the corridor entrance when Willa came back around the side of the building. She was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, and the posture of someone who had calculated the odds and decided waiting was more efficient than chasing. "You checked his gait," Willa said. 2 minutes ago, Anand pushed off the wall. Vet tech is on the way, if we transport him on that leg. Full fracture within 6 hours of active duty." Willa looked at the door. "Where's Borek?" Inside. Something moved around Anand's eyes, figuring out how to write the incident report so that a trained K9 unit being pulled off schedule by a civilian nurse reads like a routine operational anomaly rather than what it actually was. Can he? He's good at framing things. A beat that wasn't admiration, he's less good at what comes after. They stood at the entrance for a moment, terminal noise at their backs, the quieter sounds of the staging area ahead. "You didn't come back just for Grit," Anand said. "I came back for Grit." "You came back," Anand said, "because you've been running the math on the sweep window since before you walked out the first time." Willa was quiet. "The cargo transfer in Terminal D," Anand said. "High-priority military equipment. Your dogs were the secondary sweep unit. They got pulled when the incident started." She held Willa's gaze. 38 minutes before the transfer moves. If there's something in that cargo and it doesn't get flagged." "You have 4 operational dogs," Willa said. "I have 4 operational dogs with handlers who are still carrying what happened in there." Anand said it without editorializing. "And if the handlers are running elevated, the dogs will work below their capability." "Yes." Willa looked at the door. She thought about her appointment window. She thought about the contracting coordinator, who was probably wondering where she was. She thought about 4 dogs and 4 handlers and a window that was 37 minutes now and closing. "You need about 15 minutes with your handlers before you send them out," she said. "Not a briefing. A reset. They need to see their own sergeant steady before they'll give you their best work." "And you know how to do that," Anand said. "I know a version of it, but it has to come from you. That's the whole point." Willa set her backpack down against the wall. "I can help with the dogs." Anand looked at her for a long moment. Then she opened the door. Inside, Borek was off his phone. He looked at Willa, walking back in with something moving across his face that wasn't anger and wasn't the original performance of authority. Closer to recalibration, the internal work of a man who had arrived somewhere against his will and was deciding what to do with it. "You came back," he said. "Grit has a stress fracture. Someone needs to confirm it before you move him." She looked at the handlers. "And your unit needs to run that sweep." Borek stared at her. "You're a nurse. Your handlers are carrying the last hour and their dogs know it. You have 4 working animals who are capable of doing their job correctly and a window that closes in 35 minutes. She held his gaze steady. "The only variable you can actually change before that window closes is whether your handlers go into that sweep still in the last hour or present in this one." A silence that had weight. Borek looked at Anand. Anand's expression was the careful neutral of someone who had an opinion and had decided to let the room arrive there. Fine. He said it like it cost him something real. Surgeon Anand, your point on handler reset. He looked at Willa. You assist. This stays inside my unit's operational structure. Understood, Willa said. It was the right call, and she respected him for making it that way, even if it had come late. Anand gathered the 4 available handlers in the staging area. She didn't give a speech. She said, flat and direct, what happened in there was a behavioral trigger we didn't anticipate. Your dogs responded within normal parameters for that stimulus. This was not a failure on your part. A pause, letting that land. But I need you honest with me right now. Who's not where they need to be? Silence. The kind that happened just before someone decided the truth was cheaper to say than swallow. The youngest handler, stocky, early 20s, name-tape reading tech, raised his chin slightly. Sergeant, I lost my read on Faust in there. I'm not sure I've fully gotten it back. That's exactly what I need, Anand said. Thank you. 2 more. Not raised hands, small acknowledgments, the kind that required something to give way inside a person first. Willa moved among the dogs instead, slowly, without instruction. She spent 30 seconds with each animal, not commanding, not handling, just existing in their space with the specific quality of calm that she'd learned over years spent in different circumstances was the most transferable thing she possessed. She didn't touch most of them. She didn't need to. Dogs read something below the surface layer of behavior, some frequency in the nervous system, and whatever Willa's frequency was, it was the right one. Handler Tech watched her with his dog, Faust, a 4-year-old male who'd been carrying elevated tension since the kennel incident, was leaning slightly toward Willa's proximity without her having moved toward him. How do you do that? Tech asked, low enough that the others couldn't hear. He's deciding to settle, Willa said. I'm just not giving him a reason not to. She glanced at Tech. The issue isn't that Faust doesn't trust you. The issue is that he's been reading your tension for the last hour and working to manage it. Let him stop managing it. Tech looked at his dog. Stop managing your face, Willa said. He doesn't need you to look calm. He needs you to actually be in this moment instead of the last 60 minutes. She met Tech's eyes. You know your dog. You know this sweep protocol. Both of those things are still true right now. Something loosened in Tech's posture. Faust felt it happen, lifted his head, looked at his handler directly, the line between them reestablishing with the quiet certainty of something that had been there all along. Willa moved on. The 15 minutes became 19, which was the kind of imprecision that operational reality imposed on operational planning. At 19 minutes, Anand looked across the staging area. Willa nodded once. 4 dogs and their handlers moved out toward Terminal D. Willa stayed in the staging area with Borek and watched them go. You're not going with them, Borek said. I shouldn't. They don't need me anymore. She's watched Grit in his kennel, patient and uncomplaining, tracking the departure of the other dogs with the dignified attention of an animal who understood he wasn't part of this one and had decided not to hold it against anyone. He'll be okay. Borek was quiet for a moment, then lower, that command you used. You don't have clearance, Willa said. I know. I'm asking anyway. Then the answer lives somewhere you don't currently have access to. He was quiet again, not the silence of someone preparing a countermove, the silence of someone who had arrived, somewhat against their will, at genuine curiosity. A classified K9 medical support program, he said, working it out piece by piece, thinking in public, which she suspected was something he rarely allowed himself to do. Not a handler, you don't have the handler access. Your conditioning was protocol-wide, which means the program was cross-training medical personnel at a level that doesn't exist in any documentation I've seen. He paused, because it was classified above my access level, and it was dissolved, whatever it was. Another pause, longer. You left. The program was dissolved, Willa said. I didn't quit. There's a difference. His radio crackled, Anand's voice compressed and controlled. Captain Borek, Terminal D, Container Bay 6. Faust has a positive indication. We need EOD, and we need it now. The staging area shifted. Borek moved. Willa stepped back out of the operational flow because this was not her moment to be in the way. She watched him radio, his voice dropping into the register that command voices dropped into when the situation had become real. She did the math without meaning to. Container Bay 6. The military equipment transfer was scheduled through Bay 6 in 20 minutes. If the device was timed to the transfer, if it was designed to go active during the window of maximum personnel concentration. Her phone vibrated. Unknown number, different from the first one. Longer routing prefix, government origin. One line, secondary trigger, main processing hall. You know what to do. Willa stared at it. She had said nothing to anyone outside this staging area, which meant either the corridor had been monitored, probable, in an active federal facility, or someone had been waiting. Had known she was here before she'd walked through the wrong door. Waiting was worse. She went to Borak. There's a secondary device in the main processing hall, she said. He turned. How do you? Your EOD response to Bay 6 will spike the RF environment across the terminal. If the secondary is triggered by elevated radio frequency activity, you have a window before it activates, probably 4 minutes from the moment your team goes active. She held his gaze. Your sweep unit is already committed. You can't pull them. Borak looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then he said, What do you need? She moved through the main processing hall at the pace of someone who was behind schedule and mildly irritated about it. Nothing that telegraphed awareness. Nothing that made anyone look twice at a woman in burgundy scrubs with a hospital badge and a backpack. Borak fell in beside her, 2 steps to the right. He'd shed the performance somewhere in the staging area and replaced it with something tighter and more functional. He knew this facility. She needed him to know it, and he knew she needed him to know it, and that was enough. The secondary device was in a maintenance equipment locker near the customs processing lane. The kind of location that existed in every large federal facility, flagged internally as potentially abandoned 3 days ago by a floor supervisor who hadn't gotten around to logging it with security. Exactly the kind of gap that certain people knew how to find and use. She crouched in front of the locker, studied it for 2 seconds without touching anything. The lock mechanism had been modified. She could see it through the ventilation gap. A secondary RF receiver mounted to the interior assembly, copper-colored, small. Price, she said, into the earpiece Borak had gotten from the portable comms kit, speaking low. Lock at the secondary location has been modified. RF receiver on the interior assembly. Is the device profile consistent with a commercial initiator? A 3-second pause. Partial intelligence only. If it's commercial, interrupt point is at the receiver-initiator junction. Accessible through the ventilation gap if you have something narrow enough. Price's voice was level. If it's custom build, I improvise, Willa said. She looked at the locker. No tools. Her hands, a badge lanyard, and the physical memory of a program that had trained her for exactly this kind of improvised and exactly this kind of unpleasant. She pulled her contractor badge from its lanyard, thin, rigid, narrow enough. Borak, she said. Here. If I tell you to move, you move. Terminal exit, maximum distance. Don't argue with me. A beat. Understood. She slid the badge edge into the ventilation gap. The next 40 seconds existed outside of normal time. She worked by feel. The physical memory of components she'd learned to read in environments where the conditions were worse and the stakes had been identical. The receiver coil was where a commercial unit always put it. The initiator wire ran perpendicular. The junction between them was accessible from a 17-degree angle if you had the patience for it. She had the patience for it. The badge edge found the junction. Pressure, careful, continuous, the kind that interrupted a circuit without triggering a shock response. There was a small, almost inaudible click. Willa withdrew the badge slowly, stood up. Her hands were completely steady. They were always steady afterward. She had never decided whether that was reassuring or just a physiological fact with no particular meaning attached to it. Price, secondary trigger at the main hall location has been manually interrupted. Recommend EOD team to this location for confirmation. Price's voice came back without its operational flatness, just slightly, just enough to be human. Copy that, Pendry. Bay 6 primary is deactivated. Terminal D is secure. A pause. Good work, Price said. Willa looked at the score mark the badge edge had left on her contractor ID. She clipped it back on her lanyard and turned around. Borek was standing 4 feet away. The expression on his face wasn't something she had a clean category for. Not awe. Not the recalibration she'd watched happen in stages over the last hour. Something rawer. The look of a person who had just witnessed something that had permanently adjusted their understanding of what a person could be, and was still in the process of absorbing it. EOD will be here in 90 seconds, he said. You should be the one to meet them, Willa said. This is your unit's operation, your facility. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face was doing quiet interior work. The things I said to you when you walked through that door, he started, are between you and your record, Willa said. Right now what matters is making sure your unit has everything it needs for EOD support in Bay 6. He blinked, found his footing, straightened into the role. The EOD team arrived in 60 seconds. Colonel Barrett Foss arrived from the Regional Command Office 40 minutes later and spent the first 8 minutes reading the incident chronology with the focused attention of a man who understood that the difference between a correct decision and a fast one was not always speed. Then he looked at Willa across the table and said, "My office ran a service record inquiry approximately 25 minutes ago. The results came back classified above my current access level." He said it without drama, a man presenting a fact that required acknowledgement. "A program designation was mentioned in this staging area today," Foss continued. "I'll tell you what I know. I've heard that designation twice in my career. Both times from people who use the past tense consistently and without elaboration." He looked at her steadily. "You were Ashfield." Willa was quiet. "I'm not asking you to confirm classification," Foss said. "I'm asking because I have a captain who spent the first 30 minutes of this incident dismissing a woman whose service record clears a level above mine, and I need to understand what I'm writing in the documentation." Anand, across the table, waited with her characteristic stillness. Borek, at the far end, had his hands flat on the surface in front of him and was looking at them. "Tell him what's relevant to today," Willa said. Then, to Foss directly, Ashfield was a classified joint program. Defense Advanced Research partnered with a Special Operations Medical Division. Combat medical personnel embedded with federal and military K9 units in high-threat interdiction environments. Cross-trained to manage canine welfare and handler psychology in field conditions where standard veterinary support wasn't available. She paused. "The program was dissolved on administrative grounds 6 years ago. I transitioned to civilian emergency medicine afterward and haven't returned to service." Foss absorbed this without showing much. "The Unified Settling Command," Anand said. "Ashfield ran a single foundational command protocol across all units," Willa said. "The theory was that a medic in a mass casualty event might need to manage multiple animals from multiple handlers simultaneously. The signal bypasses handler-specific conditioning and drops to the base layer. It was retired from active documentation when the program dissolved, but retained in the base conditioning of any animal trained under Ashfield methodology." She paused. "Grit is old enough to have been directly conditioned in the program's final operational year. The others were young enough to have been conditioned early by personnel who trained under the same protocols. The signal was still there. I just used it." "He recognized you," Anand said. "He recognized the protocol. The protocol is attached to a type of environment, a type of person. He made an association." Willa looked at the table. "Dogs remember things whole, sound, posture, the particular frequency of someone who has been in the same kind of situations they've been in. He wasn't recognizing me. He was recognizing something he associated with safety." "That's not nothing," Anand said quietly. Willa didn't answer that. Foss looked at Borek. Something passed between them that Willa didn't interrupt. Then Foss said, "Lieutenant, your conduct toward Miss Pendry upon initial contact constitutes a formal matter of record. You'll face a mandatory conduct review. Given the operational gap created by the staging area incident, your unit command decisions during the sweep window will also be reviewed." A pause. "You're not relieved of command pending the reviews, but you're on notice." Yes, sir, Boric said. He said it without qualifier or defense, and it was honest. Foss looked back at Willa. Grit is being transported to the regional veterinary facility for imaging. Handler Tech will accompany him for the transfer. He paused. That was your recommendation. It was the right call, Willa said. Yes, Foss nodded once. Then, for the official record, Miss Pendry, what I observed today, corroborated by Sergeant Anand and handlers Tech, Restrepo, and Walsh, constitutes professional conduct at a level extraordinary by any applicable standard. That will be reflected in my documentation in full. He held her gaze. Your name deserves to be attached to what happened here today. In a record that doesn't disappear. Willa looked at the table surface. She thought about what that meant, her name in a record, attached to something real. 4 years of building a life around what she chose not to be. 4 years of emergency medicine and night rotations and the particular piece of problems that came through a door at 2 in the morning and needed exactly what she had. I appreciate that, she said. Boric found her in the main corridor 20 minutes later while she was waiting for her escort to the medical annex. He walked toward her without the stride of a man expecting a room to rearrange. Just a man. He stopped about 6 feet away. I was wrong, he said, about everything I assumed when you walked through that door. The clinical assessment, the dismissal. He stopped, started again. The way I spoke to you in front of my unit and port security. His jaw worked. I don't have an explanation for it. I have a reason. I made a fast read, and I held on to it longer than the evidence supported, but that's not the same things as an explanation, and I know the difference. Willa looked at him. He was holding eye contact, which she gave him credit for. Some men, when they realized they'd been wrong, couldn't look straight at the person they'd been wrong toward. They got defensive, or they performed apology in ways that were really about them. Boric held it, uncomfortable, which was at least honest. The flag's been pulled? She asked. 20 minutes ago. She looked at him for another moment. He'd earned the review that was coming. He'd also, when the situation required it, gotten out of the way and used what he had to offer. Both things were true. Both things would stay true, regardless of how the rest of it played out. Your handlers ran a clean sweep today, she said, especially Tech. When Anand asked for honesty, he gave it. That's harder than it looks. She paused. Make sure he knows you saw that. Something shifted in Boric's face. Not absolution. She wasn't offering that, and he was smart enough to know it if she tried. Just an accurate accounting of what he'd done right in the second half of this morning. Which was different from pretending the first half hadn't happened. He nodded once. She walked past him toward the medical annex. She made her appointment. 47 minutes late, still smelling faintly of Federal Terminal and adrenaline. The intake coordinator looked at her badge, looked at the clock, and made a professional decision not to ask. The 3-month contract started Monday. She sat in the waiting room afterward and looked out at the terminal through the window. Ordinary, mid-morning movement. Cargo vehicles, personnel in high-visibility vests, the ambient machinery of a federal facility that had returned to its routine operations after being, for a brief stretch of the morning, something else entirely. Nothing in its surface suggested what it had contained 2 hours ago. Her phone vibrated. A different number. One she recognized from a chapter of her life she didn't discuss at intake appointments. The text was brief. We need to talk. Not about today. About what today proved. Willa looked at it for a long moment. She thought about Grit in transport with Tech beside him, patient and certain. The way dogs were certain about the things that mattered to them. She thought about Tech saying, I'm not sure I've fully and stopping there, which had taken more than people gave that kind of thing credit for. She thought about Boric saying, I don't have an explanation, and meaning it as a distinction rather than a dodge. She thought about 40 seconds in front of a maintenance locker with a badge edge and a copper wire and everything in her that had known, before her conscious mind had finished forming the plan, exactly what to do and exactly how to do it. She'd put the phone in her pocket. She'd call back. Not right now. Right now she was going to finish her paperwork and eat something that wasn't a granola bar and sit for 5 quiet minutes with the fact of what this morning had actually been. Not the version she'd tell anyone, but the version that was true. She was a trauma nurse with a 3-month contract and a motel room with an unpacked bag and a life she'd built carefully and on her own terms. That was real. She intended to keep it real. She was also the person who had heard 5 federal K9s come apart in a restricted staging area and known, before she'd consciously processed what she was looking at, exactly what they needed, and exactly why. Those two things had never been separate. She'd just spent 4 years letting herself use only one of them. The intake coordinator called her name. Willa picked up her backpack and walked through the door. Outside somewhere, in a transport vehicle heading toward a regional veterinary facility, a dog named Grit was resting his chin on his paws and watching the road the way dogs watched things. Not with expectation, not with worry, just with the complete and unhurried attention of an animal who had found what it was looking for and trusted, without documentation or explanation, that it was still out there. He wasn't wrong about that.